Imagine you're a CIA agent in the 1950s. You walk into your top-secret lab, put on your lab coat, open a drawer, and instead of classified files, it's filled with syringes, LSD tabs, and zero supervision. Welcome to Operation MK Ultra. The moment in history when the government basically said, what if we could melt people's minds for freedom? This isn't science fiction. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is a real chapter in American history where the CIA went full Breaking Bad meets Burning Man, trying to invent truth serum, erase memories, and yes, create brainwashed assassins with a budget, a badge, and a bottomless bottle of acid. Hello, travelers. Histories do not always need to be boring. You can rest here and listen to hilarious histories to drift off to sleep. Tonight, we will explore the topic, why you wouldn't survive Project MK Ultra, and many more. Before we continue, leave a comment to let me know when and where you are listening to this. And hit the subscribe button, but only if you enjoy what I do here. Let's begin. Let's rewind to the early 1950s. The Cold War is revving up. Everyone's convinced the communists are under their bed, and the CIA is just getting started on its golden era of doing things that would absolutely get you arrested today. One day, someone at CIA headquarters said, "Hey, what if we used mind control to fight communism?" And instead of laughing, everyone in the room nodded and started writing checks. Thus was born MK Ultra, a government-funded project with one goal: figure out how to control the human brain through drugs and electroshock and sensory deprivation and hypnosis and why not, possibly teleportation. Yes, really, they looked into it. Now, instead of running this as a normal research program with, say, ethics boards or medical consent, the CIA basically said, let's skip that boring part where people know what's happening to them. And off they went, injecting people with LSD without warning, dosing prisoners and mental patients, hiring sex workers to lure men to hotel rooms and slip acid into their drinks, while agents watched from behind a mirror like the worst version of Netflix ever created. This was all under the direction of one man, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist who looked like he should be teaching high school chemistry, but instead ran the CIA's unofficial mad science division. He was like a real-life Walter White, except with more government funding and less moral compass. Dr. Gottlieb believed that with the right cocktail of drugs, you could turn someone's mind into putty, and then sculpt that putty into a loyal spy, or maybe a brainwashed assassin, or possibly a guy who just screams at walls. Science is unpredictable. The CIA genuinely believed that the Soviets were ahead in brainwashing, and that the only way to catch up was to go completely off the deep end, like snort a line of mercury and see what happens levels of deep end. So they started recruiting scientists, psychologists, and a few people who were probably just hanging around a Grateful Dead concert too long. It was the only government project where the mission briefing was probably, try not to melt anyone's face today, okay? And this was just the beginning. Meet Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the acid wizard of Langley, the man, the myth, the war criminal, with a chemistry set. If you ever wondered what would happen if you handed a chemistry nerd a blank check, zero, adult supervision, and the moral compass of a Bond villain, you'd get Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. Officially, he was the head of the CIA's technical services staff, basically the Q branch for American espionage. Unofficially, he was the wizard behind the curtain of one of the darkest, trippiest, and most ethically bankrupt experiments in US history. Let's start with appearances, because they make this even weirder. Gottlieb didn't look like a villain. He wasn't some cackling super genius with a cat in his lap. He looked like your average chemistry teacher, balding, bearded, with a soft-spoken voice and a fondness for sandals. He meditated, raised goats, and lived in a cabin. He drank herbal tea. Folks, herbal tea, while casually creating chemical cocktails to erase people's personalities. This man was a walking contradiction, a pacifist who designed poisons, a nature lover who conducted psychological torture, a man who literally brought his own box of chemicals on vacation, just in case he felt like testing some mind control formulas at the beach. Gottlieb's mission: break down the human mind, strip it of identity, rewire it like an old radio. His logic was chilling. To control someone's thoughts, you must first destroy who they are. Now, if that sentence sounds like something written by a Marvel villain, congratulations, your instincts are working. Because Gottlieb didn't just theorize this, he tried it on real people. Lots of them. Let's talk credentials for a moment. Gottlieb was a biochemist, and a brilliant one at that. The CIA loved him because he was creative, obedient, and most importantly, not squeamish. When asked to create untraceable poisons, amnesia drugs, truth serums, or the chemical equivalent of oops, all madness, he didn't flinch, he just got to work. In fact, his job was so top secret, most of the CIA didn't even know what he was doing, which is how you end up with one man approving hundreds of LSD experiments with all the oversight of a bored teenager managing a salad bar. What do you want today, boss? Memory erasure, lethal hand cream, untraceable paranoia juice, coming right up. Now, LSD wasn't illegal yet. It was new, exciting, and largely untested. And to Gottlieb, it was like Christmas in a vial. He believed this little chemical could unlock the secrets of the human mind, or at the very least, turn someone into a suggestible mushball who would spill secrets, follow orders, or bark like a dog if told to. He tested it everywhere, on agents, on prisoners, on civilians who had no idea they were taking part in anything, except maybe a headache study. He even dosed fellow CIA employees at the office party, because apparently nothing says team bonding like a surprise existential crisis. In one infamous case, Gottlieb slipped LSD into a colleague's drink without warning, just to see what would happen. What happened was Frank Olson, a CIA scientist, had a full mental breakdown, became paranoid, and according to the official story, threw himself out of a hotel window 10 days later. Now, whether he jumped or was pushed remains, well, suspicious. But this is what Gottlieb's brand of science often led to: confusion, tragedy, and a lot of people screaming, "Wait, what did I just take?" If you're thinking, this doesn't sound legal, congrats again, you're right, it wasn't. But this was the Cold War, and the CIA had adopted a very loose interpretation of the Geneva Conventions, namely ignoring them entirely. Gottlieb's reach went far beyond drug experiments. He built a CIA poison lab, where he developed things like exploding cigars, poisoned toothpaste, and toxins for assassinating foreign leaders. Fidel Castro, Patrice Lumumba, and even some of our own allies were on his, let's say, experimental wish list. He once tried to develop a spray that would make someone grow a beard overnight, the idea being to humiliate enemy leaders by giving them a surprise puberty situation mid-speech. Yes, this is a real thing, paid for by tax dollars. But despite the cartoonish tone of some of these projects, what Gottlieb did wasn't funny, it was terrifying. His experiments left people permanently damaged, psychologically shattered, in some cases, dead, and most of them never knew why. Because remember, MK Ultra didn't believe in consent. They believed in plausible deniability, and the best way to avoid lawsuits is to make sure your test subjects don't remember what happened in the first place. Gottlieb eventually retired in the 1970s, just before the scandal broke wide open. When Congress started asking uncomfortable questions, much of the documentation was conveniently destroyed by order of his superior. So most of what we know about MK Ultra, its fragments, testimony, and a few rogue files that somehow escaped the shredder. After retiring, Gottlieb, well, he disappeared into the woods. No joke, he lived on a farm, practiced Buddhism, and taught children with disabilities. Because of course, the mind control chemist chose that redemption arc. He died in 1999, never faced trial, never apologized, just quietly vanished into history, like acid on the tongue of a forgotten subject. LSD, shock therapy, and enhanced interrogation, a guide to how not to run a science experiment. If you were hoping that the worst part of MK Ultra was just a few CIA guys running around slipping acid into each other's punch bowls, well, buckle up. That was just the weirdly whimsical opening act. Now we're diving into the full psychological horror show, complete with forced druggings, screaming patients, memory wipes, and enough electroshock therapy to power a medium-sized village. MK Ultra wasn't just one experiment. It was a sprawling buffet of bad ideas, with over 150 sub-projects conducted under various aliases and codenames. Imagine a science fair run by sociopaths. Now take away consent, oversight, and basic human decency, and you've got the general vibe. Let's start with the star of the show, LSD. Gottlieb and his team were obsessed with acid, not as a party drug, but as a tool for mind control. They believed that if you gave someone a high enough dose, you could effectively wipe their brain like an Etch-a sketch and reprogram them from scratch. Step 1. Break the mind. Step 2. No idea. Step 3. Perfect American sleeper agent. They called it psychic driving, which sounds like a cool superhero power, but really meant playing creepy tape loops over and over again while someone was pumped full of LSD, strapped to a bed, and deprived of sensory input for days, sometimes weeks. This brings us to Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, a Scottish psychiatrist, and somehow a willing participant in this horror montage. Cameron wasn't just involved, he went full mad scientist. He ran something called the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, which, despite the friendly name, was more like a psychological gulag with throw pillows. Patients checked in for things like postpartum depression or anxiety, totally manageable stuff. But once you were inside, it was a different story. Cameron believed in de-patterning, which meant breaking down your personality entirely using LSD, weeks of sleep deprivation, barbiturates to induce coma, and up to hundreds of electroshock treatments. Yes, hundreds. Because apparently when your patient can't remember their own name, you just keep turning the dial until they forget they ever existed. One patient woke up thinking she was 5 years old. Another forgot her husband and children entirely. And the best part? These people did not consent to any of this. They thought they were going in for standard psychiatric care. They got MK Ultra'd instead. But wait, it gets darker. There were other sub-projects involving prisoners, mental institution patients, addicts, and even sex workers, many of whom were given hallucinogens without warning, and then observed like guinea pigs in a kaleidoscope nightmare. In one study, the CIA created a safe house in San Francisco, affectionately known as Operation Midnight Climax. Yes, that's a real name. No, you are not hallucinating. Here's how it worked. CIA hired sex workers would lure unsuspecting men to the safe house, slip LSD into their drinks, and then leave them to trip out while agents watched from behind a two-way mirror with notepads and martinis. Imagine a frat house, but somehow less ethical. Why? Because the CIA wanted to know if a man, in the throes of an acid trip and post-coital confusion, would reveal state secrets or could be controlled somehow. The answer, shockingly, was no, but they kept doing it for 10 years. Now, let's talk about the enhanced interrogation side of MK Ultra, because it wasn't all just trips and comas. There were also techniques that would make medieval torturers say, "Whoa man, maybe take it down a notch." Subjects were locked in pitch-black rooms for days, deprived of food and sleep, given cocktails of stimulants and depressants, blasted with high-volume sound or looped audio like "You are not yourself" over and over again. The goal? Create total confusion, break the subject's will, and rebuild their mind in whatever shape the CIA desired. Unfortunately, instead of programmable super spies, what they got was mostly incoherent trauma victims. And if this all sounds like it never really worked, well, that's because it didn't. There was no breakthrough, no magical mind control formula. What they discovered, after decades of abuse and millions in funding, was that drugging people into madness does not, shockingly, lead to obedience. It leads to lawsuits and PTSD, and eventually, congressional hearings. By the early 1970s, MK Ultra was starting to fall apart at the seams. The public was beginning to learn the horrifying truth. Whispers turned into headlines. Lawsuits began piling up, and like all good government scandals, the CIA responded with its favorite technique: shred everything. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MK Ultra records destroyed. Thousands of documents gone. Only a few rogue files escaped incineration, hidden in budget folders and misfiled expense reports. Shout out to Poor Office Organization, true unsung hero of historical accountability. And so for decades the true scale of MK Ultra remained buried in half-truths, redacted memos, and the haunting memories of its victims. Because here's the twisted irony. The CIA didn't learn how to control people's minds. They just learned how to break them. And to this day, we still don't know the full story. Some say MK Ultra never fully ended, that its techniques were folded into later Black Ops projects, from Guantanamo Bay to foreign interrogation sites. Others say the agency learned its lesson, that science without ethics is just cruelty with a lab coat. Either way, the moral of this story is clear. Don't let the nerd with the test tubes run your secret torture program. Welcome to the most ethically bankrupt magic show in history. MK Ultra's Watch What Happens When We Spike People Without Telling Them tour. No tickets, no consent forms. Just surprise acid trips and a lot of screaming. Let's be very clear. Informed consent was not just ignored. It was burned, buried, and then danced on by a bunch of CIA agents in lab coats. The goal? To study how people behaved under the influence of mind-altering substances. The method? Treating everyday folks like frogs in a high-stakes, LSD-soaked science fair. Let's start with prisoners, because of course that's where the CIA went first. Why bother with volunteers when you've got a captive audience who can't exactly say no? In places like Atlanta Federal Penitentiary and the now infamous Lexington Rehabilitation Center, inmates were offered shorter sentences or privileges in exchange for participating in medical research. What they didn't know, they were about to be chemically launched into a Salvador Dali painting. These experiments involved massive, repeated doses of LSD, combinations of hallucinogens and sedatives, isolation and surveillance that made Big Brother look like a babysitter with a pair of binoculars. Some prisoners were tripping for weeks, dosed again and again, until they could no longer tell what day it was, or if they still had a body. One inmate described it as living in a dream where the devil comes to visit you every few hours. Another thought he'd died and was stuck in a CIA-sponsored afterlife, which frankly doesn't sound that far off. Now, let's talk about mental patients. If you're already in a vulnerable state, say struggling with depression, anxiety, or schizophrenia, what's the most helpful treatment? Apparently, according to the CIA, the answer was dose you with LSD until you forget your own name, and then electrocute your brain. Hospitals across North America, especially those with ties to university research departments, became unwilling test sites for MK Ultra. Many of the doctors involved didn't even realize the real purpose of the experiments. They thought they were helping with new psychiatric treatments. In reality, they were pawns in a game of can we wipe someone's mind like a chalkboard. Patients were given drugs without being told, left alone in dark rooms with white noise playing endlessly, strapped to beds during episodes of chemically induced terror, and in some cases, put into comas for days while loops of phrases like, "You are nothing, you are nothing, you are nothing," were played over and over again through headphones. One patient entered the hospital with postnatal depression. She left unable to recognize her children. Another checked in for mild anxiety, and came out convinced she had been abducted by aliens. And the worst part, none of them signed up for this. They weren't test subjects, they were victims. But wait, it gets weirder. Let's head to San Francisco, where the CIA decided, hey, what if we bring the acid to the streets? Enter Operation Midnight Climax, which sounds like a bad adult film, but was somehow even sleazier. Here's the setup. The CIA rented a bunch of apartments in San Francisco's Telegraph Hill neighborhood. They turned them into fake brothels, complete with CIA paid workers, red lighting, and two-way mirrors. The plan? Lure unsuspecting men in with the promise of romance. Slip LSD into their drinks. Watch what happens while CIA agents sat behind mirrors with headphones, clipboards, and occasionally cocktails. The agents, many of whom volunteered for this job because, free show, weren't exactly following scientific protocol. One internal memo literally describes them as more interested in watching the sexual activity than the drug response, because nothing says national security like voyeurism with a government badge. And what did they learn from all this? Not much. Most of the men just panicked, cried, or started reciting conspiracy theories. So, naturally, the CIA kept the operation running for nearly a decade. Elsewhere, the CIA ran similar experiments in bars, restaurants, and even public parks, under something called Project Sub-Project 3. Catchy, CIA operatives would walk up to random civilians, slip acid into their drinks, and observe the aftermath like they were watching a live episode of Fear Factor, Psychedelic Edition. These victims included college students on dates, homeless people, ordinary citizens just trying to eat a sandwich without hallucinating a dancing dragon in their tomato soup. And again, no one was told. No follow-up, no apology, just a free trip to Crazy Town, and then back to reality with no idea what just happened. Imagine trying to explain that to your boss. Sorry I didn't make it to the meeting. I was temporarily dosed by a covert government agency, and spent 4 hours thinking I was made of spaghetti. To make matters worse, the CIA actually studied how to create amnesia in their test subjects. So many people genuinely had no memory of what was done to them. Others were too ashamed to report it, or assumed they'd had a breakdown, which, to be fair, wasn't entirely wrong. In the rare instances where people did find out, it was usually decades later, long after the experiments were over, and the people responsible had either retired, died, or quietly changed careers from government chemist to guy who sells crystals at the farmer's market. The truth is, these weren't just unethical experiments, they were human rights violations with a lab coat and a clipboard. People weren't treated as human beings. They were variables, test cases, data points on a chart, and all in the name of, what exactly? Controlling the mind. Creating a super spy? Protecting freedom? In the end, all they really managed to do was traumatize innocent people and prove that, if you remove ethics from science, you're just doing magic tricks on people's souls. So the next time someone offers you a drink in a smoky jazz bar in San Francisco, maybe ask if they work for the government first. So, after all the LSD, the brainwashing experiments, the midnight brothels, the electroshock overkill, and the trail of confused, half-naked men stumbling out of safe houses, did MK Ultra work? No, not even close. Despite over a decade of experimentation, the CIA failed to unlock the human mind like a combination safe. What they did unlock was a door to ethical hell, and the realization that maybe, just maybe, pumping people full of hallucinogens without their consent was not the golden key to national security. Let's break this down, shall we? The scientific results. Somewhere between useless and completely insane. What MK Ultra produced was a giant pile of anecdotal nonsense. No reproducible results, no consistent findings, no super spies who could assassinate with their minds or forget who they were on command. Unless the command was forget where you put your pants. In which case, success. CIA scientists learned a few things. LSD makes people unpredictable. People on LSD don't follow instructions. When you give LSD to an entire group of people and then yell, "Go," nobody does anything useful. They tried to train people to be Manchurian candidates. Those mythical mind-controlled sleeper agents who could be activated, like a walking time bomb with a code word. Instead, they got sweaty agents in hotel rooms yelling "Pineapple" at a very confused man who was busy trying to pet the wallpaper. In fact, the only consistent result of these experiments was a lot of screaming, memory loss, and psychological damage. If MK Ultra had a Yelp page, it would be 1 star, turned my brain into a lava lamp, would not recommend. The madness. When the scientists became the guinea pigs. Here's where it gets even more absurd. The CIA didn't just dose other people, they also dosed themselves. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the acid wizard himself, had a habit of casually taking LSD like it was chewing gum. He'd often spike drinks at CIA parties just to observe the reactions, which is a nice way of saying ruin someone's marriage. One now infamous incident happened in 1953, when Gottlieb organized a retreat at a cabin in the woods for a group of CIA officials. Very cozy, very trust-building. And then, without telling anyone, he slipped LSD into everyone's drinks. The result? Paranoia, panic, hysterical laughter, at least one grown man sobbing in a corner while reciting nursery rhymes. One of the men dosed that night was Frank Olson, a CIA bacteriologist. He had already been involved in biological weapons programs, but this experience pushed him over the edge. Within days, he began to question the ethics of the entire operation. He grew paranoid, he became unstable, and then, just 9 days later, he fell out of a 10-story hotel window. The CIA said suicide, his family, and most of the internet today say cover-up. That's when the madness stopped being funny. The paper trailed to nowhere by the 1970s. MK Ultra was finally unraveling, not because of a moral awakening, mind you, but because journalists and investigators started sniffing around. In true CIA fashion, the agency tried to delete everything. In 1973, then CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of most MK Ultra records. Poof. Decades of, oops, we dosed another janitor down the memory hole. But they missed a few boxes, misfiled financial documents, a few surviving memos, and of course, whistleblowers who hadn't been silenced or mind-wiped. This led to the famous Church Committee hearings. where Congress learned that yes, the CIA had drugged Americans without consent, conducted brainwashing experiments, tried to build truth serums, and generally acted like a bunch of mad scientists with a Pentagon credit card. The hearings were filled with horror, confusion, and a lot of really bad poker faces. One senator asked, "Did the agency ever consider the long-term consequences of these actions?" The CIA rep blinked and basically said, "We didn't think that far ahead." Translation: "Oops, our bad. Now please enjoy your freedom." Slightly used. The long, strange trip back to reality MK Ultra officially ended in the mid-70s, but its legacy still leaks through the cracks like a gas leak in the national psyche. Some of the people involved just moved on, changed jobs, disappeared into academia, pharmaceuticals, or quiet retirement. Others remained haunted. Families never got answers. Victims never got closure. The US government quietly settled a few lawsuits, offered vague apologies, and then tiptoed away like a raccoon caught rifling through your trash at 3 a.m. Today, MK Ultra lives on in conspiracy theories, pop culture, and any time your uncle brings up mind control at Thanksgiving. It's been referenced in everything from Stranger Things to The X-Files, Jason Bourne, and American Horror Story. Because what's scarier than an agency that literally said, "Hey, what if we erase someone's personality with drugs and then build a new one we can control," and then actually tried it multiple times? So did it work? If the goal was to make mind-controlled super agents who could resist torture, spy flawlessly, and assassinate with a stare, then no, MK Ultra was a cosmic failure. But if the goal was to erode public trust, traumatize hundreds, violate every ethical boundary imaginable, and leave a legacy of fear and suspicion that still resonates today, well then, mission accomplished. So after years of secrecy, acid trips, and Cold War paranoia, you might wonder, how did this nightmare finally come to light? Simple, bureaucratic sloppiness, a few stubborn survivors, and a government that can't keep a secret if it's written on a tax form. Welcome to the aftermath of MK Ultra. The part where everyone suddenly pretended they had no idea why there was a budget line for 500 tabs of LSD and one-way mirror installation. Let's rewind to the early 1970s. Watergate opened the floodgates. America was in a mood. Nixon had just pulled off the political equivalent of slipping on a banana peel while robbing a bank. Watergate, and suddenly everyone was wondering, hey, what else has the government been up to? Spoiler, a lot. Cue the investigative journalists, like Seymour Hersh, who in 1974 dropped the bombshell in the New York Times that the CIA had been spying on American citizens. This wasn't just a whoopsie wrong file situation. This was systematic, secret, and very illegal. This prompted the creation of the Church Committee, named after Senator Frank Church, a man who looked like he owned 6 pairs of reading glasses and wasn't afraid to use them to glare at CIA officials. And what did the committee find? Well, they stumbled upon something weird called MK Ultra, and they asked the CIA, politely at first, "What the hell is this?" We destroyed the files, a CIA classic. By that time it was 1975, and the CIA was already in full panic cleanup mode. 2 years earlier, in 1973, then CIA Director Richard Helms, a man who resembled a golf club come to life, ordered all MK Ultra files shredded, burned, poof, gone, because nothing says we didn't do anything wrong like destroying all the evidence in a hurry. In fact, Helms didn't just shred the files, he shredded them personally, like a boss-level villain in an espionage sitcom. And then he retired. Legend says you can still hear the faint whir of a government-issued paper shredder every time someone says mind control. Unfortunately for the CIA, they missed a few things. Financial records. Yes, some pencil pusher in accounting filed budget memos under the wrong department and forgot to shred them. So when Congress started sniffing around, they discovered some very suspicious invoices. You know, normal stuff like $2,200 for unmarked van plus blackout curtains, $7,500 reimbursement, safe house furniture and handcuffs, and the always iconic $240,000 to fund Canadian mind control via university grant. Congress began to piece together the twisted jigsaw puzzle of MK Ultra, and what they found was so disturbing that even the most hardened Cold War warriors started sweating into their suits. The hearings, public theater meets national horror story. The 1975 Church Committee hearings were broadcast on national television, and for many Americans, it was the first time they heard phrases like unwitting test subjects, psychoactive substances, electroconvulsive mind erasure. It was like watching a news report if that news report had been written by Stephen King and sponsored by a pharmaceutical company with no moral compass. CIA officials shuffled into the room looking like kids caught cheating on a test. The testimonies were filled with, "I don't recall, those records were destroyed. It was a different time, you know." It was indeed a different time. A time when the government apparently thought that science meant torturing people with LSD and calling it national security. The survivors who spoke out among the most chilling revelations were the actual victims who came forward. Survivors like Frank Olson's family, who learned decades after the fact that their father had not simply had a bad reaction to drugs, but was likely murdered or coerced into silence after being drugged and psychologically tormented. Then there were Canadian victims, like those at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, where Dr. Ewan Cameron, funded by MKUltra, had been playing Frankenstein with human minds. Patients who went in for mild anxiety or postpartum depression were subjected to sensory deprivation, forced drugging, and memory-erasing depatterning therapy. One woman, Linda MacDonald, was reduced to a childlike mental state and had to relearn how to walk, talk, and read because someone wanted to know if the human mind could be wiped clean. Survivors and their families filed lawsuits. Some got small settlements, most got stonewalled, and the CIA, they stuck to the same script. We were trying to fight communism. Also, we don't remember anything. Legacy of a cover-up. After the hearings, Congress passed laws to rein in the CIA, at least on paper. Executive orders were signed to prevent further human experimentation without informed consent. But the damage had been done. MKUltra became the ghost in the machine. The thing whispered about in conspiracy circles. The dark punchline to every "can you trust the government" conversation. The origin story for half of Hollywood's dystopian plots. Even today, it lives on in everything from Stranger Things to the Bourne series, to paranoid Reddit threads written by people who swear their uncle's dentist was one of the guys. The ironic punchline: MKUltra was based on the fear that other countries were developing mind control tech. And yet, in the end, America did most of the brain frying all by itself. No enemy spies were caught, no super soldiers were built, just broken minds, ruined lives, and a shredder that probably deserves its own medal. So the files were shredded, the hearings were broadcast, and the CIA got a stern talking to, followed by, let's be honest here, not much actual punishment. MKUltra officially ended in the 1970s, but if you think that means it's over, well, allow me to welcome you to the haunted attic of American history, where nothing truly dies. It just shows up in a Netflix series later. Because MKUltra didn't just leave behind a few traumatized scientists, some suspicious coffee, and one very confused Canadian hospital, it also left behind a legacy. And by legacy, we mean a bottomless pit of conspiracy theories, a VIP pass to pop culture notoriety, and a nagging sense that maybe, just maybe, we still don't know the full story. Pop culture, where MKUltra got its Netflix deal. Let's start with the fun part, because nothing says mass psychological horror like a cameo in your favorite TV show. MKUltra is everywhere. It's like the Forrest Gump of mind control. It shows up in all the weirdest places. Stranger Things? That's not just sci-fi nostalgia. Eleven's mom was part of a fictionalized MKUltra program. Those nosebleeds? Probably not FDA approved. The Bourne Identity? Super spy with amnesia and killer reflexes? Sounds a lot like the kind of thing Sidney Gottlieb would have cooked up after 3 tabs of LSD and a lecture on espionage ethics. The X-Files, Fringe, American Horror Story, even Call of Duty. Everyone has had their MKUltra moment. And let's not forget music. The band Muse named an entire album after it. So did Uncle Acid and the Deadbeats. Which sounds like a band that would 100% be MKUltra test subjects. What's the deal? Why does this story keep getting retold? Because it's the perfect cocktail of horror and reality. It's real enough to be terrifying, but weird enough to feel fictional, like the government's own low-budget sci-fi series, but with a higher body count. Conspiracy theories, the gift that keeps on spiraling. Once the truth about MKUltra leaked, the public imagination took the wheel and drove straight off a cliff. Now anytime someone acts a little too robotic, or forgets what day it is, someone whispers, MK Ultra. Celebrities stumbling during interviews, MK Ultra. Presidents blinking too slowly, definitely MK Ultra. Your ex ghosting you after a third date, probably MK Ultra. Let's be honest. The theory buffet includes the CIA assassinated people using mind-controlled agents. Hello, Manchurian Candidate. Mass shooters were activated via post-hypnotic suggestion. The program never really ended. It just got rebranded with a more boring name and a new budget code. And sure, some of these theories sound like they were typed up in a bunker by someone wearing a tinfoil onesie. But can we blame them? After all, the official truth, the one admitted by the US government, is already wild enough to be unbelievable. They did drug unsuspecting citizens. They did fund electroshock experiments on children and mental patients. They did erase minds, sometimes just to see if they could. So the public took the story and ran with it. Because if your government once paid a guy to see if LSD could make cats telepathic, yes, that was real. Who's to say they wouldn't try to beam Justin Bieber's thoughts into your microwave? What we still don't know. Now here's where things get really uncomfortable. Remember those 1973 files? The ones that were shredded faster than dignity at a reality show audition? Yeah, those were most of the core MK Ultra documentation. What we know comes from surviving financial logs, testimonies, and a few blessed bureaucratic accidents. But the full scope? Still a mystery. There are dozens of sub-projects whose names sound like unused James Bond movie titles. Project Artichoke, Project Bluebird, Project Monarch, depending on how far down the rabbit hole you want to fall. How many people were involved? We don't know. How many were harmed? Still unclear. Did they succeed at anything? Besides ruining Thanksgiving dinners forever for some families. That's also murky. What we do know is this. We were probably a few bad ideas away from an actual mind control horror movie becoming real. And even though MK Ultra is closed, that doesn't mean intelligence agencies have stopped experimenting. They've just gotten better at hiding it behind plausible deniability and modern PR. Final thoughts. What have we learned? So let's reflect. What did MK Ultra teach us? Well, don't trust a program with a name that sounds like a Marvel villain. If a man in a suit offers you a drink at a bar and insists it's on the house, run. Science should probably not be mixed with espionage, megalomania, and recreational drug use. And most importantly, transparency matters. Because when institutions believe they can operate in total secrecy for the greater good, it turns out the greater good often ends up screaming in a padded room with no idea how they got there. So the next time you hear about a special project or someone mentions behavioral research, you might want to double check your water supply and your therapist and your dreams. MK Ultra may be history, but its shadow, still flickering, just out of sight, probably watching you through a two-way mirror. Sleep tight. Your life as a soldier in Napoleon's army mud, marching, dysentery, and just maybe eternal glory. Congratulations. You're now the proud new property of the French Empire, specifically the Grande Armée. You didn't volunteer, because why would you? But your name was pulled in the conscription lottery, which is less like winning a prize and more like getting picked to be cannon fodder with benefits. You're 19, you smell like garlic and soap made out of goat fat, and the most military experience you've had up to this point was punching your cousin in the face during a wine festival. Still, you're told you're going to fight for liberté, égalité, fraternité, which sounds noble, until you realize the unofficial fourth value is marcher jusqu'à ce que vos pieds hurlent. March until your feet scream. The recruitment office, where hope goes to die. You show up to the town square, and a guy with a mustache bigger than his face shoves a musket into your hands and slaps you on the back like you've just been knighted. You ask if there's any training. He laughs and hands you a pamphlet that says point gun, shoot enemy, repeat. You get issued a uniform that smells like whoever wore it last didn't survive the laundry stage. The coat is too big, the pants are too short, and your boots were clearly made by someone who's never seen feet before. And then there's the hat. Ah yes, the shako. It's tall, stiff, and makes you look like a triangle trying to invade Austria. But hey, fashion before function, right? Say goodbye to home and personal hygiene. No time for hugs, no time for tears. The sergeant, who seems powered entirely by rage and cheap wine, is already yelling things like move and Secca Blue. You walk like a drunken goose. Your mother tries to run after you with a bundle of garlic and a loaf of bread, crying and screaming something about the family goat. You don't understand what she's saying, but you feel vaguely guilty and kind of hungry. Your hometown fades into the background as the drum starts beating, and you realize this is it. You're off to war, probably, or just to walk in the wrong direction for 3 weeks straight until someone points at a hill and says, "There, that's the enemy." So what are you fighting for? The truth? You're not really sure. You think it has something to do with Napoleon being mad at the Austrians, or the Prussians, or the Spanish, or the British, or everyone, really. The man has a to-conquer list, longer than a Parisian bakery line. You just know you're fighting for France, or maybe just for survival, or maybe just because it was this, or working in your uncle's manure shop. Either way, you're in it now. And the only way out is to either rise through the ranks, or be shot in the leg, and politely discharged. First lesson of army life. Lower your expectations. Forget hot meals, forget clean socks, forget dignity. Army life is about marching until you see God sleeping on rocks, sharing a campfire with a guy named Jack, who snores like a dying accordion. But the camaraderie, it's real. You'll form friendships with guys whose names you barely remember, held together by shared trauma, laughter, and the constant possibility of being blown into ham. You might even learn to love it, not the death, necessarily, but the sense of being part of something bigger, a living, breathing, slightly smelly machine of conquest. And besides, once you've been through a French winter campaign, you can survive anything, even marriage. Now grab your gear, fix your bayonet, and get ready, because this isn't just history, this is your life now. Welcome to the Grande Armée, Day 1. Welcome to the mud parade. So much for glory. Turns out it's mostly squelching noises. You woke up this morning thinking you'd ride into battle like a hero from a painting, wind in your hair, musket gleaming, and maybe a dramatic sunrise behind you. Instead, it's raining sideways. Your socks are now one with the mud, and you've just stepped in something that may or may not have been alive. There are no trumpets. There are no heroic speeches. There is, however, Corporal Duval, a man with one eye, 2 teeth, and the permanent expression of someone who smelled something terrible and found out it was him. He is screaming, loudly, mostly at you. You line up in formation next to Jean-Pierre, who hasn't bathed in weeks and thinks war is a fun way to meet girls. You'll learn that Jean-Pierre is dangerously optimistic. He will not survive the year. Marching orders, literally, just march. The march begins. You thought soldiers charged into battle. First mistake. Napoleon's army is a marching army. If there's one thing the emperor loves more than invading Europe, it's logistical suffering. His strategy is simple. Walk faster than the other guys, surprise them, and hope they haven't had lunch yet. You walk, then you walk some more. Then, just when you think the day's over, someone shouts, "Encore," and you walk again. Your legs have given up. Your boots gave up 5 miles ago. Your soul is still negotiating. You trudge past farms, fields, and roads that seem specifically designed to ruin your morale. Carts creak, muskets clatter, and the mud. The mud is everywhere. It seeps into places mud should never be. By midday, you've lost feeling in your toes, and also, strangely, in your will to live. The smell of glory. You know that classic phrase, the smell of battle? Turns out it's mostly men, horse, wet wool, and whatever died in the ditch you're sleeping next to. There's an aroma to the Grande Armée, a sort of fragrant blend of tobacco, unwashed ambition, and the lingering ghost of last night's onion soup. You look around, half your unit is coughing, the other half is trying to remember how to load a musket. You hear someone behind you whisper, "I think I joined the wrong war." That man is now your best friend. The uniform, designed for style, not survival. Your coat is sharp-tailored to make you look heroic from a distance. Up close, however, it's made of itchy wool, mystery stains, and bad decisions. The collar scratches your neck like it's mad at you. The buttons are made of pewter and spite. The hat, the shako, tall and proud, is now filled with rainwater and a spider you will name Napoleon le WOULDN. And the boots. Oh, the boots. One is definitely 2 sizes too small. The other might have belonged to Henry, a guy who vanished mysteriously in the last campaign and was last seen sinking into a Venetian bog. You try to walk evenly, but you clomp like a drunken goat. The mud laughs. It knows you'll never win. Dinner. If you're lucky, eventually the march halts. You think, finally, food, warmth, maybe a dry place to sit? Incorrect. Dinner is a soup that tastes like regret and is mostly cabbage water with a hint of whatever the quartermaster found in a ditch. If you're lucky, there's hardtack. A biscuit so hard it has cracked 3 teeth and 1 friendship. There's no firewood, so you huddle next to a smoking twig pile and listen to a guy named Claude talk about his goat farm. He will talk about this goat farm every night until battle, and possibly during battle. Sleep, a relative concept. You sleep under your greatcoat, lying directly on the earth, which is surprisingly judgmental. It whispers, "You chose this." Rain taps your face, wind tugs at your blanket. Someone snores beside you like a dying moose. You close your eyes and dream of warm bread, home and socks without holes the size of Luxembourg. But just before sleep takes you, you hear the distant sound of a drum beat. Tomorrow, the real horror begins. Training, possibly actual fighting, almost definitely more walking. And you'll be right there, boots squelching, hat crooked, stomach growling, living the dream. Or at least someone's idea of it. Welcome to day 1. Only a few thousand more to go. By now, you've accepted that marching isn't a temporary inconvenience. It's your new full-time job, religion, and slowly deteriorating relationship with gravity. Napoleon, that tiny tactical tornado of ambition, believes that war is won, not with bullets, but with blisters. His favorite move? Surprise the enemy by showing up faster than physics should allow. While they're still setting up camp, you're already charging over the hill, bleeding, hungry, and deeply, deeply confused. You are expected to walk 20 to 30 miles a day, every day, uphill, in the rain, while carrying a 60-pound backpack, a musket, a bayonet, and the burden of every poor life decision that led you to this moment. And just when you think you might finally find silence, the drum starts again. That drum, that cursed, unceasing, sleep-depriving drum. It beats like the soundtrack to your suffering, a rhythmic reminder that you are still alive when you'd really rather not be. Your feet, a tragedy in 3 acts. Let's talk about your feet, or what's left of them. Once upon a time, they were functional. Now, they look like 2 overcooked sausages wrapped in regret. Blisters, check. Blisters on your blisters. Of course. New skin, gone. Toenails, MIA. You've developed a limp that makes people think you're either injured or inventing a new dance. Every step is a negotiation between bone, boot, and God's cruel sense of humor. You wrap them in rags. You curse the cobbler who made your shoes. And yet, you keep marching. Because if you stop, there's a good chance Corporal Duval will personally drag your corpse to the next checkpoint and use it as a warning to others. The cavalry, the dream you'll never afford. You look longingly at the cavalry as they clip-clop past, smugly mounted on horses that seem to be treated better than you. Their boots are shiny, their pants don't have holes, their blisters, non-existent. Some of them even have saddle cushions. The cavalry isn't just a different division. It's another universe, a cleaner, more glamorous universe, where war comes with elevation and breeze. You think, maybe I'll join the cavalry. Spoiler, you won't. To join, you need to supply your own horse, which is roughly as attainable as your own chateau. You can't even afford a second sock, so you return to your position, back to marching, staring at the hindquarters of the guy in front of you, and wondering how long it'll take to develop full-on hoof envy. Dinner, a culinary horror story. After a long day of march until your soul leaves your body, it's time for dinner, an experience both nourishing and emotionally damaging. First, there's hardtack, also known as teeth's final test. It's a biscuit baked once during the reign of Louis XVI, and then rediscovered in a crate, labelled, "Do not eat." You dunk it in soup to soften it, and then, in despair when it doesn't. Next up, salted meat. And by meat, we mean a mysterious chunk of something that may have once grazed. It's so salty that it doubles as a preservation tool and a form of psychological warfare. It smells like bad decisions and tastes like betrayal, and yet, you eat it, because what else is there? A turnip? A handful of mud? Jean-Pierre once ate part of his shoelace and said it wasn't bad. Water. The Russian roulette of refreshment thirsty? Great. Here's a canteen full of muddy creek water and optimistic guesses. If you're lucky, the water is only filled with bits of grass and that thing floating on top, which you're choosing to believe is a leaf. If you're unlucky, it contains something biologically exciting, like dysentery. Ah yes, dysentery. Your constant companion. It waits quietly, like a snake in your intestines. Striking just when you've reached maximum vulnerability, it turns your digestive system into a war zone and ensures that you never feel safe drinking again, or marching, or moving, or breathing near a latrine. But does that stop you? No, because tomorrow you'll wake up, strap on your dying boots, shoulder your rusting musket, and march again, for glory, for France. For reasons you no longer fully understand, Battlefield 1805. Not exactly a fair fight. Ah yes, the glorious chaos of Napoleonic warfare. Hold your fire and your bowels. Let's say you've miraculously survived the mud, the marching and the mysterious rash that's spreading across your back, faster than Napoleon's ambitions across Europe. You've eaten things no man should eat, walked farther than any human should walk, and now you've arrived at your reward, a battlefield, somewhere near a place you can't pronounce, surrounded by men you can barely stand against enemies you've never met. It's cold, it's loud, it smells like gunpowder, horse sweat, and something that might have been a human 5 minutes ago. But hey, at least you're finally going to do what you signed up for. Fight for glory. Or at least try not to die horribly while holding a glorified pipe that goes bang. Let's talk about your weapon. You're holding a musket. Specifically, a flintlock musket. The cutting-edge weapon of the 18th century that somehow stuck around to fight in the 19th. It's about 5 feet long, weighs 10 pounds, and has the lethality of a mildly aggressive stick if you're more than 10 feet away. To use it, you go through the following sacred ritual. Bite the cartridge. Hope it's powder, not something Jean-Pierre repackaged from the latrine. Pour the powder down the barrel, stuff the ball and wadding in, ram it down like you're angrily stirring porridge. Cock the flintlock. Hope the flint doesn't misfire. Pull the trigger. Wait 20 seconds. Repeat. If you're still breathing, you fire in formation, standing shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of other terrified conscripts. It's less a battle than a team-building exercise where people explode. The sounds of war. A symphony of regret cannons are booming. Not just booming, they're earth-shattering, soul-rattling, underwear-ruining thunder machines. One blast and the guy next to you is suddenly a cloud. Your ears ring. You can't hear your sergeant yelling. Not that it matters. His orders have devolved into something between charge. And we're all going to die. Horses gallop past in every direction. Some dragging cavalry, others dragging nobody, because their riders are now a permanent part of the landscape. And the smoke. Oh, the smoke. Black powder doesn't just kill people, it blinds them. By the third volley, you can't see the enemy, or your boots, or your hands. You could be fighting Austrians, Russians, or aggressively dressed scarecrows for all you know. Battlefield logic. The rules are made up and your life doesn't matter. Somewhere in the mess, the officers are trying to maintain discipline, but it's like trying to herd drunken cats through a firework display. Lines blur, orders are forgotten. Your comrade fires his musket backward by mistake, and now he's in urgent need of a priest and a new shoulder. Still, there's something oddly organized about this chaos. You reload, fire, march forward, reload again, duck a cannonball, watch Shuck get launched 20 feet into the air, like a very patriotic ragdoll, march some more. Occasionally, someone stabs someone with a bayonet. You scream. They scream. Everyone screams. It's not pretty. There's no swashbuckling music, no slow-mo hero shot. Just grunting, fear, and a lot of slippery mud made from things we won't describe. And then, it's over. Suddenly, the battle slows. The cannon fire fades. The shouting turns to groaning. Smoke drifts away like a bad dream, revealing the twisted metal and twisted limbs left behind. Bodies everywhere. Horses that won't get up. A man wandering in circles, asking for his hat, unaware his leg is missing. And then you realize, you're still standing. You survived. You don't know how, but you're alive. You feel something. Pride, relief, mild survivor's guilt wrapped in adrenaline and blood-soaked socks. You find yourself leaning against your musket, blinking through the haze. You look at the ragtag remains of your company. Fewer than when you started, but still here. There's a weird kind of camaraderie. The kind that only comes from dodging death together and stealing someone else's salted pork when they weren't looking. Maybe this is what glory feels like. Or maybe it's just frostbite setting in, and your brain is doing that thing where it mistakes survival for meaning. The Russian adventure, also known as nature's vicious middle finger, welcome to 1812, hope you packed a coffin. You'd think by now, you'd caught every terrible twist military life could offer. Mud, starvation, musket, misfires, and sleeping in a trench with a guy named Pierre, who hasn't bathed since the fall of the Bastille. But no, because Napoleon has a new idea, let's invade Russia, in winter. That's right, Russia. The land of snow, silence, and existential dread. The place where generals go to lose wars and soldiers go to lose toes. Napoleon promises it'll be quick, a lightning-fast campaign to teach the Tsar a lesson, in and out like a military baguette. You believe him because you're tired, malnourished, and still think your emperor is a genius. You march east in June, with the largest army Europe has ever seen, over 600,000 men, representing a dozen nations. It's less an army and more a mobile city, complete with supply wagons, horses, cannons, and people who've never seen snow, and think how bad can it be? Oh, sweet summer child, the long walk into hell. At first, the countryside rolls by in a blur of fields and forests. You're still doing your favorite activities, marching, sweating, and eating bread that's hard enough to repel bullets, but then the trees vanish. Villages go up in flames. The locals have this strange custom called burning everything before you get there. It's called the scorched earth strategy, and it turns out it's wildly effective. You're hungry? Too bad. Every town is a pile of ashes, every barn is empty, every chicken has been evacuated or set on fire. The temperature drops, and so does morale. Your uniform wasn't built for this. Your boots leak, your fingers go numb. You're walking across a continent-sized icebox, and the only warm thing around is your fever. You begin to notice something strange. Your friends are dying, but not in battle. They die in their sleep, in their boots, on their feet. One moment they're walking, the next they're lying face down in the snow, frozen stiff like poorly dressed statues. You don't stop to bury them. There's no time, there's no energy. You just keep moving, because stopping is worse than dying. It's dying slowly. The menu, leather soup, horse jerky, and despair. By mid-autumn, the real Russian army finally shows up. But they don't fight much. They retreat, set more things on fire, and wait for nature to do their dirty work. Your rations are gone. You haven't seen a loaf of bread since Poland. You've started boiling your belt for soup. Some guys roast leather from their saddle straps. One man claims he found a rat. He's now the most popular person in the regiment. Even the horses are giving up. They collapse by the hundreds, their bodies becoming the only source of warmth, and occasionally, protein. Yes, you eat horse, you eat everything. If it's not moving, it's probably on the menu. And then come the wolves, real ones. Huge, shaggy, glowing-eyed monsters that smell your despair and decide you're officially prey now. They circle your camp. They pick off the stragglers. You start carrying your bayonet, not just for enemies, but for nature itself. The retreat, which is French for run away and freeze slower. Eventually, Napoleon realizes something. This was a mistake. But he doesn't say that. Instead, he orders a strategic withdrawal, which is code for we are absolutely screwed. You turn around. You march west. But now it's December. Snow blankets everything. Wind cuts through your coat like it's made of lace. Every step is a battle. Every mile is a graveyard. Your comrades collapse and are left behind. Some go mad. Some walk in circles until they fall. Some take off their clothes because their brains no longer know what cold is. By the time you reach the Berezina River, you have no dignity left. You're crossing a broken bridge under enemy fire, surrounded by corpses frozen in every tragic pose. People fall through the ice. Cannons are abandoned. Entire divisions vanish. You don't know how you make it out. You just do. By some miracle, you cross back into friendly territory. You look around at the few who made it with you. From over 600,000 men, only about 100,000 remain. And of those, many are broken beyond repair. You're not a soldier anymore. You're a survivor. A skeletal, frost-bitten shell of a man who once believed in glory and honor and cute girls waving handkerchiefs. Now, All you believe in is dry socks, so you've survived dysentery, frostbite, and a wolf-related misunderstanding. Congratulations. You're still breathing. That means you might just have a shot at one of the rarest prizes in Napoleon's army. A promotion. See, unlike the old monarchies where military rank was basically decided by which cousin you were allowed to marry, Napoleon's Grande Armée is technically a meritocracy. That means if you show courage, discipline, and an uncanny ability to dodge cannonballs, you can rise through the ranks, even if you started as a dirt-poor farm boy who thought bayonet was a type of French cheese. Sounds good, right? Finally, a system where talent is rewarded. Well, kind of. Let's break it down. Promoted for valor, and because the last guy is in pieces. Here's how promotions really work on the front lines. You're in the middle of a battle. Things are exploding. Your commanding officer, Lieutenant Dubois, is giving orders when suddenly he explodes in a dramatic display of red mist and regret. The sergeant looks around and shouts, "You? Yes, you. You're in charge now. Congratulations. You're now a corporal, and you didn't even need to fill out paperwork." Napoleon's army operates on this very simple rule. If you're still standing, you're next in line. Rank often comes not from time served or seniority, but from survival. It's a bit like musical chairs, except the music is artillery fire, and the chair is a flaming wagon wheel. Many of Napoleon's most famous officers, like Marshal Ney or Murat, started out as nobodies. They rose through sheer guts and battlefield brilliance. But make no mistake, for every rags-to-riches hero, there are 1,000 guys who just got slightly better boots before getting blown in half. What makes you worth promoting? So let's say you're not just lucky, you're actually good. You keep your head in the chaos. You know how to rally a dozen panicking men with a few shouted words. You can aim your musket without crying. Maybe you even bring a wounded friend back from the front line. Word spreads. The officers start to notice. A captain mentions your name in a report. A general squints at you and says, "Didn't he survive Ilo? Give him a stripe." And just like that, you might get a fancier epaulet, a slightly better sword, and permission to yell at people half as miserable as you. But don't get cocky. Being promoted means you're now expected to make decisions, like where to die, when to charge, and which poor soul has to carry the powder keg. And let's be honest, your new job mostly consists of managing panic with confidence you don't actually have. Still, there's something magical about standing on a hill, wind in your hair, hat, slightly more ridiculous, knowing that you've climbed one rung on a very bloody ladder, the price of glory. Of course, promotion isn't just a shiny badge and a better blanket. With rank comes responsibility. And with responsibility comes targeting by snipers. That's right. Enemy sharpshooters love aiming for officers, because if they can take out the guy giving orders, the rest of the unit might turn into a headless chicken parade. So now that you're wearing a shiny sash, congratulations, you're a walking bullseye. Also, your friends, they might resent you. After all, you're now the guy who tells them to charge into musket fire, instead of being the guy who ducks with them. The bond changes. Some will salute you. Others will mutter under their breath about how you used to snore like a dying goat, and now you act like royalty. But the worst part? You begin to see how thin the line is between ambition and survival. Every man above you is one bad hour away from death. Every rank you climb is built on the bones of someone who didn't make it. You can't help but wonder how many men had to die so you could wear this belt buckle. To the victor goes slightly less terrible rations, and yet people dream of promotion, because even a little rank brings slightly better food, a tent that doesn't leak as much, and the vague promise that you might not be first into the meat grinder next time. It brings recognition, maybe even a medal, maybe even a letter from Napoleon himself, scribbled in hurried ink, congratulating you for not dying in spectacular fashion. And if you're really, really good, legendary, even, you might climb all the way. Lieutenant, captain, colonel, general, you'll give orders instead of taking them. You'll command hundreds, and you'll probably still freeze to death in a swamp somewhere. But hey, you'll die with honors, and in Napoleon's army, that's about as close to retirement as it gets. Legacy. You survived Napoleon's army. You're basically a superhuman now. They said it couldn't be done. You limped through it anyway. So, you made it. You're not entirely sure how or why or with what limbs, but you did it. You survived Napoleon's army. You, a humble peasant boy who once thought tactics was a type of vegetable, have now become a battle-hardened veteran of the Grande Armée. What does that mean? Let's do a quick tally of your accomplishments. You've marched over 3,000 miles, often in circles, sometimes on purpose. You've fought in wars across half of Europe, occasionally knowing who the enemy was. You've eaten things no human should eat, including soup made of leather, mystery meat, and optimism. You've slept in mud, snow, barns, and one time inside a dead horse. You've lost friends, teeth, and possibly the ability to sleep without dreaming about cannonballs. And yet, somehow, you are still here. War hero or potato vendor? Yes, now that the smoke has cleared, you return home. France looks smaller, your village looks simpler, and your neighbors look at you like you've come back from the moon. Some treat you like a hero. Children follow you around, wide-eyed, whispering stories about the man who fought with Napoleon. You even get to wear your uniform at parades, where someone hands you a cup of watered-down wine, and you try to remember what it's like to sit in a chair that isn't moving. Others? Well, they just want potatoes, because you're also broke. Many veterans, no matter how many battles they fought, end up selling vegetables on the roadside, dragging a cart with one good leg, and a medal that jingles softly whenever you cough. Employers don't really understand what to do with expert at surviving artillery fire. On a resume, the haunting memories, no one wants those, not your mother, not your wife, not the priest. You try to explain what it was like at Austerlitz, or in the Russian snows, or how quiet it gets right before the enemy fires. But the only people who truly understand are the other veterans. The ones who nod silently at you across the tavern, lifting their mugs in wordless solidarity. Because you've all seen too much and smelled far worse. Living legend, just ignore the limp. Here's the thing, even if you're broken and bitter, you were part of something massive. The Grande Armée was the most feared military force in the world. It changed how wars were fought. It shattered kingdoms. It rewrote the maps of Europe like a drunken cartographer. And you weren't just there, you were it. You remember the sound of drums echoing through fog, the smell of gunpowder, the way an officer would raise his sword and yell, "En avant," before being immediately shot in the shoulder. You fought in Spain, where every house had a sniper behind it. You've trudged across Italy, where the hills were as steep as the prices for wine. And you've stood in Russia, staring at a burning village while the sky snowed regret. And while emperors rise and fall, treaties are signed, and history books are written by people who've never touched a bayonet, you'll always know the truth. You were there. So what now? Now you get to enjoy life's quieter pleasures. Sitting without hearing a drumbeat in your head. Sleeping in a bed that doesn't collapse when someone sneezes. Eating something that isn't grey and chewy. Not having to identify corpses before breakfast. And maybe, just maybe, you fall in love. Maybe you raise chickens. Maybe you grow old and tell your grandchildren wild stories about the time you helped take Vienna by accident. You become a living reminder that France once marched across the world, that Napoleon wasn't a myth. He was real, and he made real people like you fight, bleed, and survive in the name of glory. You polish your medals on national holidays, not because you crave recognition, but because you earned them the hardest way possible. One muddy step at a time. And hey, it could have been worse. After all this, just be glad you weren't British. They had to wear bright red coats that made them look like moving targets. Their food was somehow even worse, and their officers still believed wars should be fought politely, like tea parties with musket fire. So hold your head high. Veteran of the Grande Armée, you may not have teeth, savings, or any trust in the weather, but you do have something no one can take away, a legacy, and one hell of a story. How the world accidentally invented fast food. Funny, greasy, and full of bizarre culinary evolution. Fast food. Just saying the words makes your stomach rumble, or maybe groan depending on how recently you indulged. It's cheap, it's quick, and let's be honest, it's usually regret wrapped up in paper, foil, or some suspiciously greasy box. Yet, Despite its modern reputation as the culinary equivalent of a questionable life choice, fast food is as old as civilization itself. Before we dive headfirst into this slippery, fried, and often cheesy history, let's ask the big question: where did fast food come from? Was it some visionary chef who suddenly decided that people in a rush needed something they could eat between meetings, horse rides, or dodging plague victims? Was it invented in the neon glow of 1950s America, complete with drive-thrus, milkshake machines, and that iconic jingle you can't get out of your head? Well, no, not quite. Fast food is not a 20th century invention, despite what your late-night cravings might suggest. It's not even something that emerged with the invention of the hamburger or the first deep fryer. It's been with us for thousands of years, growing and evolving every time humanity thought, I'm hungry, but I also need to run away from something quickly. Because, spoiler alert, humans have always been a bit impatient, and survival doesn't always wait for a 3-course meal. Think about it. Humans discovered fire roughly 1.5 million years ago. Once we figured out how to cook food instead of gnawing on raw roots or suspiciously chewy bugs, it was only a matter of time before someone decided, hey, what if I don't have time to sit down and actually eat this properly? That's the moment fast food was born. Even if it looked a little different back then. Probably charred mammoth bits, wrapped in leaves and eaten while sprinting away from a saber-toothed tiger. Fast food isn't just about speed, it's about convenience, portability and survival. Back in the day, there was no waiting for your artisanal grain bowl or vegan avocado toast. You grabbed what you could, as fast as you could, and went on your way. Sometimes that meant stealing fruit from a tree. Sometimes it meant grabbing a stale piece of bread at the market. And sometimes it meant eating a mysterious meat pie that probably contained more surprises than ingredients. And here's the funny thing. As civilization marched on, so did fast food's quirky evolution. It went from being a necessity for survival to a social and cultural phenomenon. Ancient Roman streets had their own version of fast food vendors. Medieval towns had pie stands and meat pies you could eat on the run. And during the Industrial Revolution, factory workers needed quick fuel to keep the machines running, and so did their stomachs. Fast forward to today, and fast food is an omnipresent global industry that employs millions, feeds billions, and occasionally sparks fiery debates about health, culture, and why your fries cost more than your first car. So buckle up, because we're about to embark on a greasy, hilarious, and occasionally gross journey through history. We'll trace the accidental invention of fast food, from ancient street vendors slinging garum-soaked delicacies, to medieval pie sellers navigating plague outbreaks, all the way to the birth of burger empires and modern food trucks. Along the way, you'll meet the weird, the wonderful, and the downright bizarre ancestors of your favorite guilty pleasures. We'll see how hunger, hustle, and a dash of human impatience shaped the way the world eats on the go. And if you're lucky, you'll learn to appreciate that next fast food meal just a little bit more, or at least laugh while you unhinge your jaw for that giant sandwich. Ready to dig in? Let's go. Imagine yourself in the bustling streets of ancient Rome, sometime in the 1st century AD. The Roman Empire is at its peak, conquering lands, building roads, and most importantly, eating. Lots of eating. For an empire this big and busy, someone had to feed the masses, especially the everyday Roman citizen, the plebeian. And here's the catch. Most plebeians didn't have kitchens, or time, or even really clean water. So what do you do when you're hungry in Rome, and your home is basically a tiny wooden box, stacked on top of dozens of other tiny wooden boxes, all smelling vaguely of sweat, garbage, and ambition? You eat out. A lot. Welcome to the world of the popinay, the ancient Roman equivalent of street food joints, fast food stalls, or, if you prefer, the OG Taco Bell, but with a lot more togas and a lot fewer drive-thrus. These bustling little eateries lined the streets and alleys of Rome, serving cheap, fast and filling meals to anyone who could spare a coin. And trust me, in an era without refrigerators or health inspectors, fast food wasn't just about convenience, it was about survival. So what was on the menu? Well, the Romans weren't exactly known for light and healthy meals, unless by healthy you mean kept you alive long enough to be conquered by barbarians. The popinai served everything from simple lentil soups to hearty stews filled with whatever meat was available, usually pork, sometimes goat, and occasionally things that might have once been animals, but were now questionable. Think of it as the original mystery meat special, but with extra flavor and a side of risk. Speaking of flavor, the undisputed king of Roman condiments was garum. Garum was a fermented fish sauce, made by dumping layers of fish guts, salt and herbs into vats and letting them stew in the sun for months until the whole thing smelled like a seafood apocalypse. To modern noses, garum might sound like a nightmare, but to Romans, it was liquid gold, the secret ingredient that turned bland dishes into something tangy, salty, and utterly addictive. Imagine pouring a bottle of the strongest fish sauce you can find on your fries. That's garum, and it was everywhere. People loved it so much that they even used it on desserts, because why not? These popinae were more than just places to eat, they were social hubs. Picture narrow, crowded streets, filled with the aroma of cooking meat, smoky fires, and the occasional whiff of less than fresh fish sauce. Romans from all walks of life would gather here, soldiers, laborers, slaves, and sometimes even philosophers who couldn't afford a proper dinner party, but wanted to debate politics over a quick bowl of stew. The seating? Well, that was often a simple bench, or maybe just standing room by the counter. The noise, loud and chaotic, with shouting vendors hawking their goods, customers bargaining over prices, and the clatter of pots and pans. Hygiene, let's just say, it wouldn't pass any modern health inspection. But back then, that wasn't really a thing. If you survived the meal, consider yourself lucky. If you were wealthy, you probably scoffed at the popinae and ate at home with your family, surrounded by marble columns and slaves serving exotic fruits. But for most Romans, these street food stalls were a lifeline. Kitchens were expensive and time-consuming, not to mention many apartments, especially in Rome's crowded insulae, ancient apartment buildings, didn't have space or facilities for cooking, so grabbing a quick hot meal on the go was the best option. The prices? Dirt cheap. You could grab a simple meal for just a few arses, Roman coins, making it accessible for the working poor who had no time to cook, after long days hauling stone or building aqueducts. Of course, eating out came with its risks. The combination of crowded streets, poor sanitation, and garum's aggressive scent meant that sometimes what you thought was a delicious stew could double as an instant ticket to stomach agony. But hey, that's the price of fast food, even back then. So next time you bite into a burger or grab a taco at your local fast food joint, remember this: you're participating in a tradition that's nearly 2,000 years old. From the smoky alleys of ancient Rome, with its popinae stalls slinging lentils and stews drenched in garum, to the neon signs of today's drive-thrus, humanity has always been in a hurry to eat, and sometimes that rush came with a side of questionable hygiene and the unmistakable whiff of fermented fish sauce. Now, fast forward several centuries to medieval Europe, a time of knights, castles, and unfortunately, a rather persistent plague or two. You find yourself dressed in a scratchy wool tunic, hoping that praying really does work this time. And as always, your stomach is growling louder than the town crier, announcing some unfortunate noble's latest blunder. It's time to eat. But unlike the fast food frenzy of ancient Rome, medieval street food had its own particular charm, survival quirks, and yes, some downright ingenious inventions. Enter the humble meat pie, the medieval world's answer to food on the run. These pies were everywhere, in bustling market squares, outside cathedrals where people were either repenting their sins or gearing up for a revolt, and even at fairs where the crowd was far too distracted by jugglers and minstrels to cook at home. What made these pies so perfect for medieval fast food wasn't just that they were portable, it was their crust. Think of the crust as medieval Tupperware, but a lot less reusable and a lot more carb-heavy. This crust, sometimes called a coffin, wasn't necessarily something you wanted to eat. In fact, many times it was so thick, tough, and dry that it resembled something more akin to a medieval frisbee than pastry. But that was the point. The crust acted as a protective shell, keeping the filling warm and, more importantly, keeping your fingers safe from the plague-infested grime of the streets. You'd eat the juicy, meaty inside, often a mix of whatever animal was on hand, spices, and some questionable bits that barely resembled meat, and then toss the crust away. It was a perfectly practical, if slightly wasteful, way to avoid germs in a world where hand-washing wasn't exactly a priority. And yes, the fillings could be a bit adventurous. Depending on where you were, The pie might contain anything from seasoned beef or pork to offal, birds, or even fish. Sometimes, all three might end up in the same crusty prison, creating a flavor combo that would make modern foodies either intrigued or horrified. But hey, hunger is hunger. And medieval folks didn't have the luxury of picky eating when the alternative was an empty stomach or worse. But pies weren't the only portable street food stars. Enter the pasties. Hefty hand pies, originally popularized in Cornwall, but loved wherever a quick meal was needed. Pasties were sealed at the edges, making them perfect for eating on the go without dropping the contents all over your tunic. Plus, their thick crust helped keep out the dirt and grime from the road. Basically, pasties were the medieval version of fast food for people who work hard, miners, farmers, and the ever-important castle guards, who couldn't just sit down for a feast whenever they felt like it. Of course, medieval street food wasn't all about pies. Bread bowls also made an appearance, with vendors hollowing out round loaves of crusty bread and filling them with hearty stews or soups. This was peak efficiency. You get your meal and your bowl in one edible package. Plus, after finishing the stew, you got to eat your bowl. That's a kind of zero-waste dining that even modern foodies would envy. Just try not to think about how many times that bread might have been touched by muddy hands before it landed in yours. Now, if you thought pies and bread bowls sounded safe, let's talk about the real street food wildcard, eel stands. Yep, nothing screams grab and go quite like a steaming plate of slippery, writhing aquatic predator. Eels were a common and cheap source of protein, especially in coastal towns and river cities. Vendors would grill or stew eels and serve them up fresh and greasy to hungry crowds. The catch, eating eel on the street, required some serious dexterity and the willingness to accept the fact that your meal might try to wiggle off your plate at any moment. And if you managed to snag a bite, congratulations, you just ate one of the original slippery, slimy fast foods of the medieval world. What about the hygiene, you ask? Well, let's just say medieval standards were flexible, with rats, fleas, and the ever-looming spectre of the Black Death. The streets weren't exactly sparkling clean. That's why these food inventions, pies with thick crusts, sealed pasties, and edible bowls, weren't just about convenience. They were practical methods to keep disease at bay while still feeding a restless population. In fact, these innovations show a kind of accidental genius. Sure, the crust might have been tough enough to break a tooth, and the stew might have had suspicious chunks, but medieval street food vendors knew one thing for sure: if you want to eat fast and survive, you better package that food well. It was fast, it was greasy, sometimes a bit moldy, but it worked. And in a time where meals could literally be a matter of life and death, that was enough. So next time you bite into a modern fast food pie or grab a handheld snack, tip your hat to those medieval vendors who, amid plague and poverty, managed to keep the tradition of quick, portable food alive. They might not have had drive-thrus, but they sure knew how to pack a meal that was fast, filling, and importantly, plague-safe. Welcome to the 19th century, a time when the world was changing faster than anyone could chew their lunch. Cities were booming, factories were belching smoke into the sky, and the rhythm of life was set to the relentless clang of machines. This was the era of the Industrial Revolution, and with it came a new, urgent problem. How do you feed millions of workers who only had 15 minutes to inhale their lunch before rushing back to the assembly line? Gone were the days when you could leisurely enjoy a meal between togas or tunics. Now workers needed food that was fast, filling, and cheap, because hey, the rent on those cramped tenement apartments wasn't going to pay itself. Enter the unsung heroes of industrial cities everywhere: the pie men, sandwich vendors, and soup carts. The true pioneers of fast food before McDonald's ever flashed its golden arches. The pie men and their portable comfort. In industrial London, the pie man was king. His carts were wheeled through crowded streets, steam rising from tins filled with meat pies that promised a few moments of warmth and comfort amid the cold, grimy air. These pies were more than just food. They were a lifeline, made from leftover cuts of meat and whatever vegetables were cheap enough to buy. These pies offered a quick, handheld meal for workers with grease-stained fingers and a hunger that could not be denied. Though not exactly gourmet, these pies were sturdy, hot, and often the only edible thing available within a mile of the factories. The crust was thick enough to double as a makeshift plate, and the filling was usually a mystery stew of meat, gravy, and bits. Some say that if you closed your eyes and focused hard enough, you could taste the echoes of a dozen different animals in one bite. But hey, calories were calories. The infamous pea soup cart. If you were lucky or unlucky enough to be in London's industrial districts, you might have encountered the infamous pea soup cart. Vendors would trundle these carts down the smoky streets, offering hot pea soup ladled into tin cups. Sounds cozy, right? Well, maybe if you liked your soup tasting like it was brewed in a rusty tin can. Pea soup was cheap, filling, and oddly satisfying, especially on freezing days when the fog mixed with coal smoke to create a soup-scented atmosphere that was both miserable and oddly familiar. The pea soup cart was the ultimate grab-and-go comfort food for the factory worker. A liquid hug that warmed hands and hearts, even if the taste was a bit of a letdown. Still, it was food, it was fast, and it didn't require a chair or table. Perfect. Across the pond, America's fast food beginnings. While London was busy with pies and pea soup, the streets of New York, Philadelphia, and other burgeoning American cities had their own fast food scene bubbling up. The great melting pot was cooking up something new and exciting. Street vendors selling pretzels, hot dogs, and believe it or not, oysters. Yes, oysters were once the original fast food superstar of the East Coast. Before they became a luxury item, served in fancy restaurants, oysters were cheap, plentiful, and perfect for a quick snack. Vendors would shuck fresh oysters on the street and hand them over to hungry workers for a few pennies. It was salty, briny, and incredibly satisfying after a long shift in the factories or on the docks. Hot dogs, too, made their first appearance as fast food around this time, mostly from German immigrants selling sausages on buns. These early hot dogs were the ultimate street food, portable, tasty, and greasy enough to make you forget about your troubles at least temporarily. Pretzels were a favorite too, especially in cities with large German populations, and their salty crunch became synonymous with the busy city streets and bustling markets. The dawn of vending machines. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just about steam engines and smokestacks. It was also the dawn of mechanical innovation that touched even the way people ate. Believe it or not, early vending machines appeared in train stations and factories, dispensing hot coffee and slices of pie to hurried workers and travelers. Imagine a cold morning in 1880s London or New York, the hustle and bustle of commuters rushing to catch their train, the hiss of steam engines, and the clink of coins dropped into a shiny machine that spits out a hot cup of coffee or a slice of steaming pie. It was the future arriving in a slightly sticky package. These vending machines were the great-grandparents of today's snack dispensers and drive-through windows, revolutionizing the way people accessed fast food and caffeine. They promised warmth and sustenance with zero wait time, perfect for the industrial age's breakneck pace. Fast food's unlikely heroes despite the grime, the sweat, and the occasional suspicion about what exactly was in your food. These vendors and their carts were the backbone of fast food in the Industrial Revolution. They fed millions of hungry workers who literally powered the modern world with their labor. And let's be honest, their standards weren't exactly Michelin star, but in a time when meals were rushed, sometimes eaten standing in the street, and often punctuated by the clanging of factory bells, fast food wasn't about fine dining. It was about survival. So next time you bite into a hot dog, or grab a slice of pizza on the go, remember those pea soup carts, oyster vendors, and pie men who paved the way. They may not have had drive-thrus or neon signs, but they had something even better: food fast enough to keep a city moving. Ah, the 20th century. A time of roaring engines, flared pants, and the undeniable rise of something revolutionary, the fast food burger empire. It all starts with a shiny new invention called the automobile, which changed everything. Suddenly, people weren't confined to their neighborhoods. They could drive, they could travel, they could get hungry on the road and actually do something about it without waiting hours for a meal. Alongside cars came sprawling suburbs, wide highways, and a cultural shift toward convenience. The stage was set for the birth of fast food as a system, a machine, and eventually, a way of life. White Castle, the original fast food machine. Enter White Castle, founded in 1921 in Wichita, Kansas. This was the first time anyone thought, hey, what if we standardized fast food? Instead of each burger being a chaotic experiment, White Castle promised uniformity. Every slider was small, square, and predictable. Tiny little patties that were cheap and cooked on a griddle with a neat stack of onions pressed into them. Why square? Because that made them easier to arrange and cook efficiently, and because consistency is king when you're trying to build trust with customers who might be suspicious about eating cheap meat on the go. White Castle didn't just sell burgers, they sold trust. At a time when food safety was a big question mark, their sanitized kitchens, white uniforms and gleaming windows whispered, "Yes, this meat is safe, and no, it won't kill you." This was revolutionary. Fast food was no longer a risky gamble. It was a reliable option for the busy worker or the curious teenager. The company also understood something crucial. Fast food needed to be fast. White Castle's staff cooked burgers in bulk, stacking them under heat lamps, ready to hand over within seconds. This was the first glimpse of fast food as a well-oiled machine, where speed and efficiency mattered more than culinary artistry. The McDonald brothers and the speedy service revolution. A couple of decades later, on a sunny Southern California day in the 1940s, two brothers, Dick and Mac McDonald, took this idea and supercharged it. They created what they called the Speedy Service System, an assembly line for burgers. Think of a factory, but instead of cars rolling off, it was burgers, fries, and shakes flying out with astonishing speed. Every worker had a specific job. One flipped patties, another toasted buns, someone else assembled the burger, and the cashier smiled as the customers grabbed their food and went on their way. This system did two magical things. It cut costs and cut wait times dramatically. And it wasn't just about making fast food faster, it was about perfecting consistency. Every burger looked, tasted, and smelled just like the last one. No surprises, except for maybe the inevitable food coma afterward. Though the McDonald brothers didn't invent fast food, or even the hamburger itself, they figured out how to turn it into a mass-produced phenomenon. They essentially created the blueprint for every fast food restaurant that followed. Enter Ray Kroc. The franchise king. Here's where the story takes a serious turn into the realm of business legends. In 1954, a milkshake mixer salesman named Ray Kroc visited the McDonald brothers' little restaurant and immediately saw potential, huge potential. He bought the rights, took their system, and began expanding it across the United States at lightning speed. Kroc wasn't just selling burgers, he was selling a lifestyle, complete with golden arches that could be spotted from miles away, bright signs lighting up the night, and a marketing machine that made even clowns seem lovable. He introduced the franchise model, letting others open their own McDonald's under strict rules to maintain quality and brand identity. This was a game changer. Suddenly, fast food wasn't just regional or local, it was national, then international, and eventually global. The golden arches take over the world. By the 1960s and 70s, McDonald's wasn't alone. Burger King, Wendy's, KFC, and countless others were popping up like mushrooms after rain, each adding their own twist, but sticking to the same basic formula. Fast, cheap, consistent. The rise of the drive-thru changed everything again. Now you didn't even need to leave your car to get a burger. Just roll up, order, pay, and gulp down your meal on the way to the next appointment, soccer game, or awkward family gathering. Marketing campaigns got wilder, smarter, and more colorful. The McDonald's clown, Ronald McDonald, became a cultural icon, reassuring kids that this was a fun place to eat, while ads assured parents that they were giving their family food they could trust. Meanwhile, chicken nuggets were invented and marketed as bite-sized miracles of fast food convenience, little crispy nuggets that somehow tricked generations into thinking they were a healthy option. Fast food as a cultural phenomenon. By the late 20th century, fast food had transcended mere sustenance. It was culture, convenience, and identity all wrapped in a sesame seed bun. It wasn't just about eating, it was about speed, efficiency, and the thrill of grabbing a meal in under 5 minutes. The rise of television and mass advertising meant fast food brands were household names, and their mascots were almost as famous as presidents or pop stars. The industry also started pushing innovations like value menus, super-sized portions, and combo meals, because nothing says fast food like getting a soda, fries, and a burger for the price of a small mortgage. So what did we learn? Fast food in the 20th century wasn't just about burgers, It was about creating a system where speed, consistency, and brand recognition came together to feed millions. White Castle showed the world that cheap, reliable fast food could work. The McDonald brothers and Ray Kroc turned it into a finely tuned assembly line, and the Golden Arches spread like wildfire, turning fast food from a quirky American idea into a global empire. And while your arteries might disagree, the world can't deny that this chapter in fast food history changed how we eat forever. Welcome to the 21st century, an era where fast food isn't just fast, it's everywhere, all the time, and often utterly unavoidable. The concept of grabbing a quick bite has exploded into a global phenomenon fueled by technology, innovation, and a collective willpower that somehow lets us justify eating fries in the car, standing up, or at 3 a.m. while wearing pajamas. Fast food today isn't the greasy mess it once was. Well, not entirely. It's become a swirling mix of old habits and new trends, from the nostalgic to the avant-garde, from humble food trucks to high-tech sushi conveyor belts. Food trucks, the renaissance of street eats. Let's start with the food truck revolution. If you thought fast food was just burgers and fries served behind a counter, think again. Food trucks have redefined fast and food by bringing a gourmet edge to street eating. Imagine Korean BBQ tacos, vegan falafel wraps, and wood-fired pizzas being whipped up on wheels, parked outside your office, your bar, or that concert you totally didn't want to attend, but ended up loving. Food trucks are the love child of convenience and culinary creativity, proving that fast food can be fresh, interesting, and Instagram-worthy. And unlike the old burger joints, these trucks often pride themselves on local ingredients and bold flavors. They're the new fast food rebels, shaking up a tired industry. Tech takes over. Drones, robots, and vending machines. If food trucks are the artful indie musicians of fast food, then technology is the futuristic pop star. We're living in a time when pizza deliveries by drones are no longer sci-fi fantasies, but real pilot projects. Imagine a small drone buzzing to your window, delivering a hot, cheesy pie while you binge-watch your favorite show in pajamas and slippers. And vending machines? Oh, they're not just for stale chips and flat sodas anymore. Thanks to robotics and microwaving tech, you can now find ramen vending machines that serve steaming bowls of noodles on demand. Sushi bars have embraced conveyor belts, whisking plates of salmon, eel, and wasabi-covered creations around a circular track, so you can eat whatever you want without uttering a single word. Even robots are getting in on the action. Some restaurants have started using robotic chefs and servers that prepare and deliver your meals, reducing wait times and minimizing human error. Welcome to the future, where your burger might be flipped by a machine with no emotional investment in your dietary choices. The gourmet fast food movement. But let's not forget the explosion of gourmet fast food. Yes, it sounds like an oxymoron, but it's a real thing. In a world where foodies rule the internet, fast food has had to up its game. Now you can get artisanal burgers topped with fancy cheeses, heirloom tomatoes, and truffle aioli. Vegan nuggets crafted from jackfruit or pea protein give plant-based eaters their crispy fix without the guilt. And don't even get me started on truffle fries. Those decadent, oily sticks of potato goodness that make you feel simultaneously rich and terrible about your life choices as you eat them in your car. Fast food chains have also jumped on the better ingredients, better taste bandwagon, marketing organic, gluten-free and locally sourced options, while still promising you'll be in and out in under 5 minutes. Because let's face it, the whole point of fast food is that it's fast, even if you're nibbling on kale chips and sipping matcha lattes. The 3 a.m. regret factor. Despite all the fancy upgrades, the core truth about fast food remains: it's delicious, disposable, and deeply unsatisfying if eaten 3 days in a row. Fast food is the original guilty pleasure, and for good reason. There's something about the salt, fat, and sugar combo that hits the brain's reward center like a tiny party. It feels good for a while, but then the regret creeps in. The sluggishness, the bloating, the sudden question: why did I just eat this entire bucket of nuggets by myself at midnight? And this is part of the modern fast food experience. Convenience at the cost of nutrition, speed at the cost of satisfaction, indulgence at the cost of your willpower. Yet, we keep coming back for more. The social and cultural impact fast food today isn't just about feeding ourselves, it's about feeding our culture. It's a social ritual, a comfort, a a lifeline when nothing else fits the schedule. It fuels late-night study sessions, impromptu parties, and even the Monday morning commute. The global expansion of fast food brands means you can find a Big Mac in Tokyo, a Whopper in Warsaw, and a chicken sandwich in Cairo, all tailored with local twists but fundamentally the same quick fix. Fast food also sparks fierce debates about health, labor practices, and environmental impact. The convenience is real, but so are the concerns about obesity, food waste, and the working conditions behind the counters. It's a complicated relationship, like that one friend you keep inviting to parties, even though they always spill something on your carpet. So what's next? Looking ahead, fast food continues to evolve. Innovations like plant-based meats, 3D printed meals, and AI-powered personalized nutrition might change how we think about quick bites. Delivery apps and ghost kitchens mean you can have food from your favorite spot without ever stepping outside. Yet, at its heart, fast food is still what it's always been. A response to our hectic lives, a compromise between hunger and time, a little greasy escape from the demands of modernity. So next time you unwrap that late-night burger or order ramen from a vending machine, remember you're part of a millennia-old tradition, a glorious, messy, sometimes questionable tradition of eating fast, eating cheap, and eating with zero apologies. Final thoughts: the grease that binds us. So there you have it. From Roman garum shops to golden arches, from medieval meat pies to spicy chicken sandwiches at 2 a.m., fast food wasn't invented. It evolved. It seeped into our history like ketchup on a white shirt. It's not just a type of food. It's a mirror of who we are when we're hungry, busy, and a little bit lazy. And if you're reading this while eating fries out of a bag, you, dear friend, are part of a grand tradition that spans millennia. Just maybe lay off the garum.